Jessica Shraybman is a lawyer who focuses on business and intellectual property. She advises entrepreneurs and creative professionals and is responsible for managing clients' intellectual property portfolios. She's a member of the Florida Bar's Intellectual Property Subcommittee and serves on the Intellectual Property Board Certification Task Force. She's also a board member of several Miami nonprofit organizations, and she graduated with honors from the University of Miami and was in the top 20 percentile of her class at Florida International College of Law. She's a native Russian speaker and the first in her family to be born to the United States. Please welcome Jessica to the show. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think that all of us, especially as online entrepreneurs, are in need of your assistance. And we're going to cover so many things today that I think are so relevant because most of us don't know what are the requirements, what are the considerations, what should we be doing when it comes to setting up our business or our business's intellectual property. So let's dive into it. What are the key steps that we need to do to set up a new business?
Okay, so first you want to decide what kind of entity is most relevant for you. In very general terms, typically people are thinking about either forming an LLC or forming a corporation or perhaps a nonprofit organization. So to think through which structure makes most sense for in your case, which is usually a determination based on what your business model is, whether you are taking on any investors or partners, whether they're silent partners or active partners. And also it's part of a tax strategy. Each entity type has different tax implications, tax benefits, et cetera. I'll just thinking about your podcast listeners and knowing the types of clients that you work with, an LLC is usually a safe start. It's very easy to convert an LLC to another entity type if it becomes important. But LLCs give a lot of flexibility that for a new early company, it's a good starting point if somebody needs something right away.
Do you think it's good to start off as like a sole proprietor, or do you think we should jump into an LLC right away?
So technically, a sole proprietorship is not a business entity. It's in most states, I think, just a registration that basically notifies the state that you as an individual are doing business, but you're not doing it through a business entity. I have not once recommended somebody to file a sole proprietorship because you if you're filing something, you might as well just go ahead and make it a business. Like the benefits, the limitation on your personal liability in case anything were to go wrong, much higher when you have a business entity. The tax benefits are more favorable for business entities. So usually if you're making the effort, you might as well just go for a business.
I'm glad you said that. Let's dive into some of that a little bit more. So, what are the tax and legal obligations for us as business owners?
Sure. So you want to make sure that you pay your taxes once a year,
That's
every
important.
year. Yes. There are very important to maintain proper distinction between the business and if you're a sole entrepreneur, for example, or if you're a small company or a young company, you really want to make sure that you're keeping the business activities separate from your personal activities. So once you form a business, your next step should be to open a bank account. And then all of your business flows through the bank account. Because if you have a business, but you're running your business through your personal bank account, and God forbid something were to happen, it will be treated as though you don't actually have a business because the business is really being run through your personal banking. So it's as though you have a veil, a corporate veil, which can be pierced, and then you put your personal assets at risk, at jeopardy. As far as the tax implications, I mean, it's just like filing your personal taxes. For businesses that have more complex business models, a variety of different revenue streams, Perhaps, depending on if it's an LLC or a corporation, there are some added complications. In an LLC, the profits and losses of the company are passed through the company to the owners. So your personal tax liability may be offset based on the performance of the business, which I should say, I always like to tell entrepreneurs this is the first few years, you might be showing losses in the business. You might not be profitable. Don't necessarily take that as a sign as failure or you're doing something wrong. It's very common. You have a lot of startup costs and things like that. I typically recommend that people work with a tax advisor, an accountant, somebody like that, just to make sure that everything is done properly. But as far as the implications go, if you're running your business above board, you're doing things through your bank account, you just, file your taxes at the end of the year and you should be fine.
I'm glad you
Make sure
brought
to
that up.
save. Go ahead.
I'm
I
glad
could
that you
ramble all day about these things.
I know, me too. I love this kind of stuff. So I'm so glad you brought up the fact that you recommend that business owners talk to an accountant. It's something that I will preach from the mountaintops till the end of time, that I'm like, you have to have your team. You need your attorney. You need your CPA. You need these people to protect you from what you don't know. You don't know. That's the hard part. We have to lean on people that are experts in this field. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I think the more we can talk about that, the better. Do you have any recommendations when people are looking for an account? Is there anything specifically that they should look for based on the type of business that they're working in? Or, do you have any recommendations on that?
So, yeah, the one thing, I hear you completely. And I think it's because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, new businesses, creatives especially, I think they shy away from getting those professional services because I think as institutions, the tax institution and the legal institution is like super old. It seems archaic. It seems like if you call an attorney for a 5-minute conversation, you're paying like a $400 bill, and entrepreneurs are like, I can't afford this.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with a lot of young entrepreneurs. And when I say young, I mean new, not age young. And a lot of upstart companies, a lot of creatives. What I like to recommend to people is when you're a new company, thinking about the accountant specifically, you're not going to have all that much that your accountant's going to need to do. Like maybe you have a mid-year check-in to make sure that things are on the right track so that you can plan anything that might need to be considered for your return. But most likely, you might the first couple of years pay like $1,000 to have a CPA prepare and file your taxes well. And not exactly the same thing with an attorney, but the way that we have structured our business model is we do a lot of flat fee work. So instead of thinking about it like you have to retain an attorney for, $10,000 a month and you don't get to roll over unused time, we really identify specific needs and projects in part so that we can help entrepreneurs establish the foundations that they should be establishing, but it not be the entirety of their budget. So I would recommend, having at least have conversations. Like there's no harm in having a conversation and to get a sense of how the accountants and the attorneys that operate. And if you are looking for something that might signal, okay, maybe this is a good fit, ask like, what does it cost to get the taxes prepared at the end of the year? Is it a flat fee or do you bill me hourly? And same thing with an attorney. Ask the attorney if they have any, special payment structures or hybrid models for, based on projects rather than entire retainer engagements.
I think that that's one thing that we as entrepreneurs forget. We sometimes tend to complicate things more than they already are, and we forget you can actually call places and ask questions. It's okay if you do that. The more questions you ask, the better, to make sure that you find out the person that you're potentially working with is a good fit for you.
Yeah.
That's someone that you can be with long term, that can actually protect your business. And I know that you have seen this happen, as I'm sure I have seen a lot of this happen too is that a lot of businesses are transferring online, and protecting their intellectual property is
Mhm.
a huge thing. So let's talk about what steps that we can do as business owners to protect that intellectual property.
Yeah, sure. So maybe you can give me some feedback on the types of things that you're seeing your clients and the businesses that you work with. Like, are they service-based clients? Are they entrepreneurs that are selling goods? What are you really seeing in your field right now?
I'm seeing a lot of people that are selling like digital courses, downloads, things that they're creating that maybe they're using in their business. They're selling it on Etsy, whatever that looks like, creating Shopify stores, but it's
Mhm.
something that they're creating that comes from their brain. But here's the hard part about this that I've noticed that a lot of people are saying, well, you can't use that because it's somebody else's idea. But the reality of it is, it's all the same, it's just our lens that we show through, right?
So yeah, that's interesting, and it kind of plays on. So it kind of plays on interpretation. I'm thinking about art. Like, you see a piece of
Mhm.
art and it inspires another piece, or how music might be sampled and things like that. And one thing I always love to point out, maybe a little geeky, but that the U.S. Constitution actually states that one of the missions or one of the objectives of Congress is to encourage and protect creativity and the arts and things like that. That is not verbatim, obviously, but they do touch upon intellectual property in the Constitution, which I find fascinating. So there are different types of intellectual property. Generally speaking, the big three that people think about are trademarks, copyrights, and patents. So you're right that ideas themselves, very hard to protect. There's no formal process for protecting ideas. The manifestation of ideas into some physical form, into some tangible medium, whether it's a painting or a photograph, or in some cases, a business model or something like that, like education, that gets manifested in educational materials and programming. There are ways to protect that. So these days, as you mentioned, a lot of business is being transacted online. And certainly there are a lot more resources, educational resources, online courses for master classes and online programs and things like that. So when it comes to that type of intellectual property, which is teaching a way of doing something, it can be a little tricky the way that that IP gets protected. IP is intellectual property for short. For people who are leading online programs and things like that, we build in IP protections through like their participation agreements or program agreements, or even the terms of engagement if it's done through an online platform, things like that. But the brand that's offering it, like Scale Your Small Business is a brand that would be protected by a trademark. Both the name of the brand and also the logo is protected by a trademark. And then just to touch on copyrights and patents briefly, those are, manifestations of ideas, like again, like photographs, paintings, books, music, all of that can be protected with copyrights. And then patents protect inventions, technical solutions that solve technical problems, that are innovative, that are unique and novel, those types of things. And one way, last thought, I'm rambling again, um, is a lot of IP is actually shared in some sort of, it's not in a vacuum, right? So we might be working on something where maybe I am hiring you to teach me your business method and business model. And you can, going back to like participation agreements, you can protect yourself through the contracts that you enter into with people. Just as an example, and then I'll stop on this train of thought. We have a client right now who's an artist. He's a street artist, and he has a whole series of characters. He is now entering into a strategic partnership with a liquor company that wants to do a whole line of their liquor that is based off of his characters. So we have copyrights on his characters, as well as a partnership agreement between the two that sets out who owns what, who can use which IP in what way, and to what extent they can use it. So oftentimes I find IP is like, I'm not a sports person at all, but I always use the analogy of like football plays, like like this person goes this way, this person goes this way, you got the defense coming around this way. It's a multi-approach system.
I
Does that
got
make sense?
Yeah, you know what? I was just gonna say, like, that you explained that so easily and so well that it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I totally get that. Where I feel
Oh,
like
yay.
sometimes this stuff can be so complicated, it'll make your head spin. So, no, I'm glad that
Yeah.
you went into that much detail because I think it's important because the more we know, the more we can be educated about what we need to do for our business. And I'm glad you brought up about the contracts and agreements that we can create within our business. Is there certain things that, let's say that we are a digital online person, are there certain contracts agreements that you're like, yes, you absolutely have to have these three things, or whatever that number might be? Are there certain things where you're like, hey, this is super important and could really come back to bite you if you don't have it?
So if you are online based, if you are having any sort of interaction through whether it's an open or closed platform, you want to establish the terms of use. Everybody always sees it at the bottom of a web page, terms and privacy policy. Nobody ever clicks them. Those are actually very important. I wish that people had to read through them, because I think a lot of times people probably wouldn't download that app if they knew exactly what was going on. But you want to establish, how can this platform be used? What what of it are you allowed to use outside of the context of the platform? If it is an interactive platform, what type of material can be posted and shared in the platform? How is the information that I'm sharing on the platform going to be used? Especially if I'm sharing any personal information. Is it going to be protected? Is it going to be sold? Is it going to be shared? How's it going to be stored? So you definitely want to think through those things. If it's a type of digital company that, again, thinking about is some sort of educational, like some course or program or something, a few of our clients who have that type of business model, they have a participation agreement that um, it, the terms of use of the platform may be more related to how you interact within that universe, but the participation agreement lays out like payment terms and what my responsibilities to you are and your responsibilities to me are. So it goes a little bit more in depth as far as what is the relationship between us, what are the services that I'm getting, what am I giving in exchange, etc. um, if there are multiple people that own the business, so if it's not a single solely owned company, you'll want to make sure that you've talked through and ideally formalized what the partnership looks like, not just between the partners, but what are the partners' rights, privileges, and responsibilities to the company. If they are an owner of the company, they have duties to ensure the best interests of the company, and you want to lay out some of that stuff as well. And also just to think through, like, okay, we hope this never happens, but what does happen in the event that we're not making decisions well together, or we're disagreeing on things? How do we handle those situations? And the hope is that right now, while we're just getting started and everything is wonderful and rose colored glasses, we can put something together that if the time comes, we have a solid game plan of how we're going to deal with the situation if things aren't going so well. I've really seen that there's a world of difference between partners who have something in place and how they're able to handle the hard times, and partners who don't have something in place and how they handle the hard times. I had a client once who, at the end of a whole rigmarole and an unpleasant termination of partnership, basically said, in contracts we trust, was like the takeaway. And I was like, I kind of agree. I know that people I think are afraid of like litigation and lawsuits and things like that, but really a business partnership, to use the cliche, is like a marriage, and you want to talk through all of these things like while you're still dating and courting each other, so I think it's very important.
Versus when you're broken up and hate each other. That's never a
When
good
you're in
time
the
to
midst
like
of it,
try to make it work.
exactly, like in that moment nobody's going to be like, when we not nobody, there are people who resolve disputes amicably, but in the point where we're like seeing red, nobody's thinking like, let's take a step back, let's think about how we resolve this in the best interests of the company, or to make sure that like you're protected and you don't lose your entire investment. No, and in that moment people are like, you messed up this, that you messed up that, and it can get really ugly. And that's not to say that things don't get ugly, things never get ugly when there is some sort of partnership agreement in place, because of course that happens too. People can be completely unreasonable, but it's at least good to have like a base to say, this is what we've agreed on, and with a little bit of guidance, maybe from a neutral third party, it can help to at least resolve things without things getting, into a court. Like things might still be ugly, but at least we're resolving it between ourselves and not, you know,
Well,
in a
and once
circus.
you have those documents too, it makes it easier to review those with your trusted third
Hmm.
party, your attorney,
Hmm.
and to say, okay, here we are this many years into business. Does this still make sense? Do we need to
Totally.
update this? And I think it's
Totally.
easier once you kind of have that baseline. I mean, in the beginning, it's probably tough, but you got to work through it, especially when you still like each other, because sometimes, I mean, we've all heard that horror story where people are no longer getting along, or, there's one person isn't holding up their end of the bargain, or vice versa. And it's
Hmm.
very sad that these businesses get stuck in that. So whatever we can do ahead of time so that doesn't happen is so important. And that
Yeah.
brings up a really good point, is not only is it our business partners, but it could potentially be our employees. And I know that a
Uh-huh.
lot of business owners are totally nervous about bringing on employees and compliance with the labor laws and all that stuff that goes into that. So let's talk about that really quick, because I think that's important, of how can we as business owners protect ourselves when it comes to employees.
Sure. And one distinction that's important to make is between employees and contractors. A lot of small companies, young companies, new companies they engage contractors quite a bit. So again, kind of thinking about our hypothetical of an online course, for example, um, and thinking through what some of our clients have done. They've engaged maybe developers to build out the interactive components. They've engaged copywriters to help write some of the course material and the programming. They've maybe hired other teachers because they're not doing it all on their own, and they're recording videos and all of that. So there's usually a whole team driving that effort. A lot of times for newer companies, those roles are filled by contractors. So maybe whether it's an independent contractor as an individual or a company, but maybe you're contracting a marketing team to come in and help set things up, or you're contracting a graphic designer, any of those other things that I've already mentioned. In those relationships, very, very, very important to have a written independent contractor agreement that clearly establishes that whatever work these individuals are doing for you or your company, that it's being commissioned, and that at the end of everything, once I've paid you and you've delivered the work product, I and or my company own the copyrights to that work. Because one of the biggest in copyright law, when you create something, by virtue of creating it, you own the copyrights to it, unless it's done in most states, unless it's done within an employer-employee context. But so if you're working with independent contractors, the presumption is that they still own the copyright, even if you've paid them, because it's unclear whether you've paid them to be able to use whatever they've created for you, or you've paid them to own what they've created for you. So in that context, very important. Employees, that's more formal, right? That's usually what we think of having people on salary, or maybe it's part-time, they're on payroll. The tax burden is being shared between the employer and the employee, as opposed to when you have an independent contractor. The contractor is solely responsible for all of their tax liability and any benefits. Usually no benefits are included in a contractor relationship. So within the context of an employment relationship, that does vary state to state. So what your state's labor laws are and what employees are immediately entitled to because of the nature of employment does vary. And of course, there's also federal laws that regulate labor. But so some things to think about are the scope of the employment. What is the context? Like, what are these people doing? Should you consider, what types of insurance should you consider? Is it enough to have general liability, or do you need workers' compensation and, you know, other benefits? Are you required to provide paid time off? Those things will vary based on situation. I think for purposes of, I think your general audience, the more important distinction is to think about, is this actually an employee or is this a contractor? And then to be prepared and handle that situation properly. And an important thing to note about that is it's not just a decision that you get to make. So it's not like I can say, I don't feel like paying somebody else's taxes, so this is a contractor. It unfortunately doesn't work that way. The Department of Labor and the IRS have a 20-factor test. So it depends on, you know, who's providing the equipment. Does the worker get to choose the time and place that they are conducting work? Is it ongoing work, so like every day, or, you know, for the indefinitely the person is working on these tasks, or is it project to project? Who's providing equipment and supplies? And then kind of a determination is made based on all of those factors of whether the person is actually a contractor or an employee. So it is very important to be clear on how you are engaging workers so that you can properly classify them.
Oh my gosh, there is so much to do with this.
I know. With
If
that, I hope that wasn't
people,
overwhelming.
yeah, if people are like, I need to, like, my goal for 2023 is to clean up my stuff because it's a mess, where can people connect with you? Because I know that you can help people all over the United States. So where's the best way for people to connect with you?
That's so nice. Thank you. My favorite thing to do is to make badass business owners out of entrepreneurs and creatives, and I'm always happy to be a resource. Our office phone number, 305-204-1835. People can always reach me via email, jessica@shraybmanlaw.com. My last name is spelled Shraybman. I know that's a lot of consonants. And we're also Shraybman Law on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. So all of the ways that people want to connect, we're always happy to meet entrepreneurs and creators.
I love that. I'll be sure to link it in the show notes so people have quick access to that as
Awesome.
well. Now, one final question for you that I ask all my guests. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a small business owner?
Be thoughtful. Think about things, have the difficult conversations, think through the possibilities. And if you do have access, a lot of states and cities have like legal clinics and free resources. I know there's like small, the SBDC, which is a small business development organization. Just be informed. If you have access to an attorney, if you can do a consultation with a business attorney or a business advisor, just really think it through. We are all about supporting risk takers and innovators, and there also ain't nothing wrong with being a little bit prepared and thoughtful before you jump off the ledge. So we advocate it completely. I wish everybody in America would be an entrepreneur. I think it's the best decision a person can make. But, just be thoughtful and talk it through and think it through.
That's so good. Thank you so much for being here today. I
Oh my
really
gosh, my
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.